So welcome back, and I'll turn it to Sarah.
All right. So this afternoon, we have a few really important and relevant presentations. So first, we're going to hear from the Small Town and Rural Committee. And we're also following that going to hear about the attorney shortage in Yakima. So first, I'm going to turn it over to STAR Committee Chair, Governor Petrasek, and STAR Committee member Murph Eman, who is the Executive Director of Columbia Legal Services.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am happy to be able to report on the STAR Committee and what we've been doing this year. And along with Murph, we're going to talk about briefly our perspectives of how the year is going and where we'd like to see things go, because there are potentially future asks that will be made of this Board of Governors, not today, maybe not this year, but next year. And I would just point out that there is a report that highlights everything that we've done, starting on page 134 of your materials. I would just say that we had a very successful first outreach meeting here in Yakima at the Red Lion down the street, where the bar exam is actually going to be given in a month or so. But 2 weeks ago, we were here. We had local members of the bar as well as the judiciary come and speak with us. We heard their concerns. Had a real good back and forth conversation with them that gave us a lot of ideas of ways that we can help serve the legal deserts here in Washington. Even a couple of our, each law school has a representative who's a committee member, and a couple of those representatives were present. And having the law schools involved in this committee is really an integral part of making this happen, because we're looking at it twofold, as not just the pipeline of having law students who pass the bar come and serve in legal desert areas, but also, as we have found out from many of the webinars and programs that we've done, where the last one we had over 1,200 people attend a webinar for a CLE credit, and a lot expressed interest of practicing in legal deserts. And these people are people like us who maybe want a career change, and they want to actually move to Eastern Washington or someplace else just for a change of pace and to get out of the city. Looking forward, one of the things that we definitely will be looking at are rule changes to APR 9 or 6, excuse me, the Rule 6 program. Especially here in Yakima County, there was pointed out to us that a lot of people, for instance, at the Heritage Academy that's here locally, that's a pre-law program where there's over 30 people there to learn about the law, and only 2 go to law school out of all those people. And that's a continuous problem of that program. It's like, if there's a heritage program with 30 people, at least 90% of them, not 1% of them, should be going on to law school. And the problem that was identified is that there's either they can't go because of money in many cases. The other big reason that they can't go is because they have families or other obligations here, and they cannot take time away to be able to go to a traditional law school. So making changes to the Rule 6 program is definitely something on our radar that we'll be making requests for and looking at down the road. We plan on having at least one, if not a couple, outreach events next year. We'll be having another job fair, if not 2, with the law schools. That was another really successful event where rural law firms and organizations posted job postings. Then there were law students or other attorneys that applied for those jobs, and there were some really successful pairings and matches. I know Murph is going to talk more about that as well. But as I indicated in the conclusion of my report, if any of you have ideas that the committee could consider for ways that maybe we haven't thought about of reaching out into these rural desert communities and being effective, please let myself know or any of the other committee members, and we would definitely be talking about it at one of our monthly meetings coming up.
Sorry. Thanks everyone for having me. Murph Eman, Executive Director of Columbia Legal Services and proud member of the Small Town and Rural Practice Committee representing legal aid. Columbia Legal Services, we have 5 offices across the state: Seattle, Olympia, and then Kennewick, Yakima, and Wenatchee. And so we struggle with many of the issues that folks who are trying to hire people in Yakima struggle with. And we wanted to talk more about what we're doing as a committee to try to address some of those issues. And Kari's already talked about many of them. One of the first things we did was reach out to Governor Inslee and ask him to declare a day in November as Rural Practice Day. And he did, and he talked in the proclamation about the great need for attorneys in rural areas and thinking about this as an opportunity rather than as a desert. And I think that's really important, that this is really an opportunity for folks, and that these are rural areas are amazing. And I grew up in a rural area. We were talking about farm animals at lunch, and one of my first memories is my mother screaming at a goat for eating the laundry. And and how do we connect folks to areas where there's such a need? And I think we can do that, and I'm excited by all of the amazing work that the committee did this year. In addition to it being Law Day, Kari talked about the Rural Job Fair. Imagine that we never thought of that before, to have a job fair that was focused on practicing in a rural area. And there were so many folks that were interested in doing that kind of work. And we ourselves participated, and we have a hire who is going to start working in our Yakima office after the bar exam. So we're really excited about that. And I know other legal aid programs and other firms have had success through that program. So I hope that that's something that we can get support for and continue. And a big thank you to Lori Powers, who really led that. It was an incredible amount of work, but it worked really well. The other piece is there's now free advertising for rural job opportunities, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit firm. You can advertise in the bar for free for your jobs, which is really great. And then Kari mentioned the pipeline program, and that's a 2-year grant that folks came together to try to think about how can we build a pipeline, particularly in the Yakima Valley. So many folks are working together with Heritage to say, what would it be like if you could go to law school? And only 2 people out of that class. And we looked at how can we create a pipeline in different areas. And one is the Rule 6 program. And what we've heard from people in the community, people who've gone through that program, other legal aid programs, is that there are some barriers in that. And we understand that it needs to be different than a law school setting. But some of the barriers include only being able to teach one law clerk at a time. If we could have a law clerk at Columbia Legal Services, one at the Northwest Justice Project, one at the Northwest Immigration Project, all working in rural areas, who could be taught together at least some of the time, that would save a tremendous amount of resources. So rather than having to teach criminal law to each person separately, we could teach them together with a single mentor. So those are some of the changes, that small changes, but I think really important changes to increase the number of folks from rural areas who can go into practice law, who are from the communities that they serve. So I think that's really exciting. The other piece we've been looking at is programs that they have in other states. A loan forgiveness program for people who are going into rural practice, or in places like South Dakota, where folks receive, I think it's around $10,000. The WSBA has done a tremendous amount of research before this committee to find out what's actually working. I talked with an executive director at South Dakota Legal Services, and she said that they are able to get experienced attorneys to come in and not just new attorneys. And that's the other important piece, is not just new attorneys, but we also need really experienced attorneys to help mentor. The issue that's come up is around how to, if you're hiring a newer attorney and you're a very small firm, how do you train that attorney? How can we bring resources together to support that kind of mentorship? And So that's something else that we're looking at, is really providing training for folks on how to bring along and teach newer attorneys, particularly in rural areas. And the last thing I'll mention is Judge Parnell's idea, which is really bringing summer interns who come to Yakima and in the Yakima Valley together so that they can learn and build a cohort and connect with each other, that it's really the relationships that people build to keep them coming to rural areas and seeing how wonderful these communities are.
Thank you. And with that, that pretty much sums up our report. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them, or any comments, happy to accept them.
Board.
I think Governor Dresden has his hand up.
Great, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks very much for the report. Aside from, you mentioned that, you welcome further ideas on what you can do. Is there any other asks that you have of the board at this time? Anything else that you would like from us?
Approve our proposed budget when it comes around in a few months.
I think continuing with the support that we've had around the CLE, around the whole issue, bar news issue that was focused on rural practice, that kind of support is really important. Continuing to support having the governor have Law Day, Rural Practice Day, I think is really important. And really supporting folks who are in rural practice. And I think just understanding that this is a huge issue. It says in the proclamation, people have to drive hundreds of miles to get to court, or hundreds of miles to get to an attorney. Many people do not have broadband, do not have access to that. And so I think just being awareness as a Board of Governors member about these issues is crucial and critical. And we were so excited as a committee to see this in the strategic plan or the goals around the Board of Governors. So really appreciate that. Great question.
Okay, Anada.
Hello. Well, I want to say thank you for your interest in the APR6 program. In terms of proposing rule changes, I think it would be very helpful. I'm sure you're thinking about this already, but I think it would be very helpful and informative to collaborate with the law clerk board. So they are tasked with supervising the program, and I think they would ultimately be responsible for carrying out any rule changes. So I would encourage you to get in touch with them, and they can help facilitate that. They are meeting next month and then in August, depending on how fast you're planning on moving with those changes. Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning that. And you are actually a person on my to-do list of people to contact soon after this meeting, to arrange a meeting at least with yourself and myself and Julianne Unite, who's the WSBA staff liaison who oversees the STAR committee. So you'll be hearing from me.
There's a comment in the chat that says, I do not know how this would work, but an idea might be to have a loan forgiveness program for new attorneys willing to practice in a legal desert, similar to programs for teachers and public service forgiveness.
And I can say that is definitely something that we've been looking at. There are a lot of, I'll wait. One of the issues with loan forgiveness programs that we've seen is that it's not just the bar saying, let's do that. Loan forgiveness programs, depending what level you do it, involves state and federal governments as well, which, as you all know, we cannot really tell them what to do. We can suggest, but chances are they want their money and they may not do that. But there are other more maybe scholarship type programs that we're looking at, where it would be more a collaboration between the Supreme Court, who is also very much supportive of this issue, us as the state bar, and maybe the county bar, of where that person or the organization is. But those are definitely ideas that we've been looking at as well.
Hey, Nam,
Hi, have we looked at what other professions do to alleviate the rural shortage of professional? I'm not sure, but is this an area that is also lacking in medical professional?
Do you want to answer?
Sure. Yes, on the rural practice webpage as part of the WSBA website, there's all the research that there was a pre-committee to the small town and rural practice committee, and they did look at some of those issues. Excuse me. One thing is to build a medical school or have a medical school in a rural area. And that has increased. And that's why we're looking at the pipeline program at Heritage. And one of the issues is if now some of the law schools are thinking about a virtual law school program. Thank you. And the idea is not just to have it virtual, but to have a hub where there would be a hub at Heritage, where there would be some in-person classes, possibly a legal clinic. That's a little bit far down the future, but a definite possibility. So that's one idea that we're looking at is if you build it, they will come or they will stay. And so I think that's a really exciting piece. And just on the loan forgiveness, we're trying to think both that where it would involve state and federal government and a loan repayment assistance plan, where that could be just state funding that would come through to give folks the money to pay off their loans. So there's a couple of different ways that we're looking at that.
thank you. Okay, Hunter, next, please. Oops.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. One item I would note for everybody, I think you're probably already aware of this, is that the work of the STAR Committee does a number of things. First of all, it's very practical. This job fair that recently happened linked up needs with people who want to fill those needs. I mean, it's a direct and palpable way that we can show that we're working to help address the shortage of attorneys in rural areas. The second piece, it might be a little less tangible, but it sends an important message to areas of the state that otherwise don't really interact much with our organization, that we are aware of this issue, that we're taking it seriously, and that it builds relations with attorneys who and practitioners in areas where they, again, don't often hear from us, but say this is something that the Bar Association that is doing that's really meaningful to my local community. So I want to thank Governor Petrosic for her leadership, and also Murph and everybody else in the committee. You're doing a great job. Thank you.
Hey, I see the hand next raised by Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask a question about the Heritage Pipeline. What is that at a university, community college? Where does that take place?
So right now it was 1 year and was renewed for a second year as funded through the law school admissions board, of which is headed by former Seattle U law dean Kelly Testy. And so it's at the university at Heritage. And so there's a group that comes together. It's, I think, an 8-week program that folks go through that in some ways simulates law school. And then they meet with local practitioners to learn more about law school and receive support to try to get admitted into law school.
Okay, where does that take place?
It's in Toppenish.
Toppenish. What institution? I mean, is it
That's
at
a
a
school.
community
It's
college?
actual school there. Yeah,
It's an actual
in
school.
Toppenish. Yes, it's
It's
private
called Heritage.
institution, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go next to Mary, please.
Do you mean Governor Rathbone, Mr. President?
I mean Mary, because we're not formal this year, and it's Dan.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. So I have a few questions. I understand the want and need to focus on the law clerk program, and I get that. I am a Rule 6, and I think I'll probably say this at every meeting until I'm kicked out of the board. But it's an important program, and so I want to acknowledge that. But I think that the focus on that is very important, and I appreciate that that's being looked at. I think something else that should be explored, at least as far as reaching these legal deserts is finding ways to reach those people to develop relationships within the profession. Because when we talk about, well, there just aren't enough lawyers or nobody wants to live here. And that's not what's been said, but if that's the fear, right, that nobody wants to move here, well, I know in my county, there is a lack of relationships because I think number one, and I think this was said yesterday, but the majority of the lawyers are on the I-5 corridor. And so I know that a lot of the attorneys in my area don't feel heard. They feel like their opinion's not important and they just don't feel acknowledged. So they kind of just withdraw from the process and just keep their heads down and do their job. There are a lot of solo small practitioners. But I think really also focusing on helping developing relationships in those areas and not Yakima. I would consider Yakima a larger area, but places like Grant County, places like Okanagan County, those places where they almost really need help rebuilding the infrastructure of even just their local bar association. So I think the outreach events are great, but even, in Moses Lake, it was a little bit of a drive to Yakima, but going to those counties and maybe creating some sort of template to say like, hey, here's some events that people are going to show up at. Because I think the last event that we had, maybe 2-3 people showed up. I really think that is something that could be, at least as far as the STAR committee, paralleled with this Rule 6 program, is going into those areas and saying, why aren't people showing up? Here are ways to get your attorneys involved again so that the attorney involvement is there. And when you bring these STAR committee policies, they're implementing them with the intention of bringing more people into the practice. So anyway, but thank you. And that's all.
Great ideas. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. One of the things that I would comment on is, your work is great. We do have, a major need here. We have a major need all around the state. It's interesting to me that Yakima is not considered a rural or small town from my perspective, being here my whole life. And I think maybe that your charter needs to look at east side of the mountains areas, because there are needs besides Spokane over here kind of thing. And so, but great work. And the other thing that I would personally love to explore more would be the south that model. I think it's a 5-year plan where you stay for 5 years, and it's like $9,000 a year total for that. So thank you guys though so much.
Well, and to your point, I can say that we've been struggling with the rural definition, and it keeps coming up at many of our meetings. And we do have a subcommittee that's looking at changing the definition in the charter of rural, because we recognize that there are a lot of areas. Even in my district, San Juan could almost be considered a rural area because of how hard it is to get there, but it's not in the definition rural. So that is something we're working on, is trying to, how do we come up with a definition? And it's almost like we need to almost come up with 2 separate definitions of rural, depending like what side of the mountains you're on or the city or something like that. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time and work and efforts, and